Good evening. Um, in the last few days, I've learned that there's a company, a Christian company, which offers a an internet connection service for parents, for their phones, which will filter out material which parents consider inappropriate for their kids, even beyond just ordinary pornography. And that raised the question for me: would an answer to the whole age verification idea be to have internet service providers or wireless providers like Verizon, whether Cox, Comcast, so forth, do this kind of filtering for them, and could that be worked out? And I thought about it some more, and the general answer is probably no, because the standards of what would be acceptable would vary from one parent to another, from one state to another, according to the various state laws, and from one country to another, since these companies are international. And most of the state laws regarding age verification generally follow the COPA laws. The Child Online Protection Act is a model from 1998, was struck down in the courts under least restrictive means analysis. They do talk about it mostly in terms of sexually explicit content. That's pretty much in terms of what we consider adult or porn, and not just in terms of subject matter. But some parents want to keep out certain subject matter, keep that away from kids too. I can understand that. Parents with a religious background, that's been an issue. One way to look at this is to look at what school systems do. What do school systems teach? Because what's appropriate for kids would depend in large part on what public schools offer, which you could say that the gender ideology, social transition, all this stuff that was happening in some grade schools that was a few years ago, or has been toned down recently, but is a way of making that acceptable in schools and making it acceptable to younger people to talk about at least gender identity or something. But many states are outlawing that. And but what you probably can't outlaw very easily is the fact that in high school, certainly we teach, and I'll also mention in high school, when I started high school in 10th grade, I had kindergarten privately, and then grade school 1 through 6, and then middle school was 7 through 9. Now middle school is 6 through 8. School start in kindergarten, and then middle school is 6 through 8, and high school is 9 through 12. And in high school, generally you start the real serious content. There's more for the adult world as you go through the same material over and over again. And you take instead of taking science, you take biology, which is a chance to learn how reproduction really works, and why people say with the higher animals and humans and most animals and most of the higher life forms, there are only two sexes. In a strictly biological sense that nature is based on. You learn why that is. You learn what heredity is, and also you start taking history and social studies. You have some of that in English class too when you study literature, but you also study social studies, you study government, you study the Constitution, you study what fundamental rights are, what the Bill of Rights is, what fundamental rights are, and you study due process of law like the 14th Amendment, and what statutory due process versus procedural, or you should probably study that. And so you probably have to learn, you probably would come across some of the issues that have affected gay people in the past, the repeal of sodomy laws in 2003 by the Supreme Court. And it had been before the Supreme Court before in 1986. And you probably learn about how gay marriage was litigated. And then you learn more about some of the more recent opinions, Bostock, where gender identity has gotten involved. So you're going to learn this stuff in high school particularly probably AP high school, but hopefully in high school in 11th and 12th grade. So that means for more mature minors, the subject matter itself would be appropriate, and would also mean that it would be very difficult, quite difficult, to undo past decisions, because you're going to have to teach it in history. Now we know that in 2022, that what happened to Roe versus Wade when it got reviewed, after a different Supreme Court. And we don't think it's as likely this will happen with some of the other stuff, but it could. But the fact that it's in our history is somewhat of a protection for keeping those rights. So I just wanted to just present all of this. This is all a story I saw. I think it was U.S. News and World Report when I was on the road Thursday, which was Ascension Day, by the way. And space travel by Ascension, that may be the only way. But yeah, I was on the road Saturday, and I just ran across the story. I think it was U.S. News and World Report, since having lunch. So I just wanted to share with you today with a very brief video, and I thank you for listening.